It started with the nightlight, a cheap plastic moon plugged into the socket near the baseboard, a soft blue glow that turned my son's room into a shallow ocean every night. I used to joke that the light fooled the dark into thinking it had company. My kid, 5 years old, dimpled hands, trains scattered under the bed, would drift off watching dust float like glitter in the beam. For months, everything was normal. Books, milk, teeth, kisses, click of the door, the quiet thud of sleep. Then he started waking up at 3 a.m. every night, like an alarm only his bones could hear. The first time I thought it was a bad dream. He padded into our room, hair stuck to his forehead, whispering, "He's back." I asked who, and he pressed his face into my arm. "The tall man with no face," he said, like describing a neighbor. "You're not supposed to show fear. Parent rule number 1, be the sturdy thing in the room." I rubbed his back, said the line all parents say, "There's nothing there. It was just a dream." Then walked him back to bed, every light on in the hall because the house suddenly felt like it had too many corners. We checked the closet. We checked under the bed. We checked the curtains and the rug and the dumb little IKEA shelf with 1,000 baskets. Nothing, just toys and dust and the nightlight's steady glow. I tucked him in. "Sleep," I said. "You're safe." He rolled onto his side and stared at the doorway, not looking at me. "He stands there," he whispered, pointing at the strip of hall beyond the doorframe. "He just watches." The next night, the same. The next, and the next. 3 a.m. Always 3. The sound of small feet at the edge of our bed and the same breathless whisper, "He's back." I started leaving our door open. I started sleeping in my clothes. I told myself, kids make up things. They test you. They make a game of control because the world is big and strange, and they're still learning where they end. But my son stopped playing with the train tracks. He stopped asking for one more book. He drew the same thing at preschool all week. A tall black stick figure body, arms too long, and where the face should be, just a white oval. The teacher asked me if I wanted to talk to the counselor. "Sometimes kids process nightmares like this," she said gently. I said yes because the alternative was to tell her my child was giving me the creeps. By the end of the week, I was jumpy enough to hear the refrigerator's hum and wonder if it was breathing. I put flour across the doorway like a fool, a powdery line to make me feel like I could catch what feet couldn't see. I told no one. I kept the nightlight glowing and sat on the hallway floor with my back against the wall, phone in hand, waiting for something I didn't believe in. At 2:57 a.m., the house felt like a held breath. At 3:01, the heat kicked on and the vents sighed. At 3:03, the baby monitor crackled with a whisper of static, the kind of noise that could be wires or weather. I raised the phone. On the screen, my son asleep, knees tucked, the ocean blue light across his cheek. I stared until my eyes watered. Nothing, no movement, no man. At 3:06, my son sat bolt upright. He didn't look at the camera. He didn't look at the bed. He turned his head to the doorway, slow, deliberate, like someone hearing their name from far away. I looked up from the phone to the real doorway, 2 steps from my shoulder. There was nothing in it. The blue light fizzed across the hall carpet. A sliver of picture frame gleamed on the wall. Nothing. On the screen, he lifted one hand. He raised it chest height and pressed his palm outward, finger splayed, like he was touching an invisible pain. "No," he whispered, clear, small. He was speaking to the space between us. My heart hammered a message I couldn't translate. "What do you see?" I whispered, loud in the stillness. My voice startled him. He turned toward me. His face was open and wet with sleep, and scared. Then he looked back at the doorway and shook his head. I stood up. "Who are you talking to?" "Nothing." He watched, the way you watch traffic for the one car you know is coming. "Buddy." My voice broke. "Who is it?" He swallowed. "Don't look," he whispered. His eyes didn't blink. He doesn't like when grown-ups look. Something slid cold through me, thin as wire. I looked anyway. The doorway was blank, the hall blank, the world ordinary and stupid and unchanged. The baby monitor crackled again, just noise, and the radiator pinged, and the floorboards sighed, as if relieved to have a job. I sat on the bed, pulled my son onto my lap, and counted his breaths until his body softened. He fell asleep, with his hand still raised toward the door. The counselor said children sometimes fixate on a figure because it's easier to name fear than to sit in fog. She said to give him words to replace the image. "Ask him what he would say to the tall man if he could," she said. "Kids think if they can talk to a thing, they can shrink it." I nodded because it felt like homework. At dinner, I asked him gently what he'd tell the man with no face. He put his fork down, stared at his peas, and said, "Don't come in my room, the way you tell a dog to sit." "And he says nothing back?" I asked. He shook his head. "He just stands," he said. "He watches with his skin." The way he said it, like fact, not the face watching, but the skin, made my scalp prickle. I laughed too loud. My husband squeezed my knee under the table, a reminder not to feed it. "You're sleeping with us tonight," my husband told him. And for one night, the hall was empty, and my son didn't wake, and we were all just mammals in a heap, breathing. The next night, we tried his bed again. 3 a.m. came like a tide. "Please," I whispered into the dark before he woke, before the house decided what to be. "Please, whatever you are, leave him alone." It was ridiculous speaking to air. It was also all I had. At 3:02, he woke. At 3:03, he raised his palm to the doorway again. At 3:04, he slid from the bed and stood on the carpet, not toward me, toward the hallway. He took 3 slow steps forward until his bare toes reached the threshold. "No," he said softly. "No, not closer, not closer." He made the smallest shake of his head. I moved before I knew I was moving. I stepped in front of him, into the doorway, into the place he was staring, arms out, heart clawing its way out through my throat. "Stop," I said into the empty hall, absurd and deadly serious. "Stop. Go." For a second, I swear, the air changed. Something taut in the space between the door frames went slack, like a wire cut. The nightlight flickered. My son's hand found the back of my shirt and anchored there, clutching a fistful of fabric. I stood like that, arms outstretched, watching the blank hallway as if it might raise a hand back. The house resumed being a house. He fell asleep again, and I stayed upright, the muscles in my forearms trembling. The next day, I taped black construction paper over the slats in his closet door. I fixed the hinge so it wouldn't creak. I put a bell on the doorknob so I would hear if it opened. At lunch, he told me I was being silly. "He doesn't use the door," he said, chipmunk-cheeked with sandwich. "He stands already there." I bought a camera, not the cheap plastic baby monitor that turns everything into slow ghosts. A real one, with an app that shows you the room in sharp lines and sends you a ping if it sees a body. I mounted it in the corner where the ceiling meets the closet, and framed the bed and the doorway, and most of the floor. My husband rolled his eyes and kissed my forehead and said, if it made me feel better, it was worth it. I did not tell him that I wasn't trying to feel better. I was trying to prove that we were alone. The first night we used it, I put my phone on the nightstand and kept one ear open for the ping. The screen glowed at my face all night. At 2:59 a.m., nothing. At 3 hours, a push notification. Motion detected in kid's room. My heart tossed itself awake so fast I almost laughed out loud, just to get the feeling out. I clicked. My son was asleep, curled like a comma. The doorway was empty. The blue wash of the nightlight softened the edges of everything. No figure, no tall anything. The app had flagged motion because of the curtain. The heat had kicked on, and the vent was breathing, and the curtain had drifted in the thin air. A stupid, false alarm. I let my breath out in a rush, and then chastised myself for using up the air we might need later. I was still watching the screen when the blue light thinned, like something stood in front of it. Not a shape exactly, not the outline of a person, just a dimming, as if the glow had to pour around something occupying space invisible to the camera's brain. A shallow, moving eclipse. The curtain stilled. The dim place widened, just a shade darker than the rest of the blue, and slid into the doorway. I blinked so I wouldn't manufacture the effect. I looked up at the real doorway from my bed. It was empty. I looked down at the screen. The dim spot stood in the doorway like it was waiting to be named. The app didn't flag it. The camera didn't recognize it as a person or a pet or anything else alive. To the logic inside the lens, nothing changed. It was just a little less blue where a head would be, then where shoulders would be, then where arms might hang too long. I watched for a full minute, maybe 2. My hands went numb, and the phone's edges dug into my palm, and the clock beeped the half hour, and I did not move. The dimness did not move either. It stood where the hall meets the carpet of my son's room. It took up space without showing me itself. "Hey," I whispered, which felt both ridiculous and necessary. "Go away." The dimness shifted. It did not recede. It compressed, like a person taking a step closer without moving their feet. I did not realize I had been holding my breath until my lungs burned. I was useless with fear. I could not wake my husband without being watched. I could not step into the hallway without stepping into it. I could not do the thing my body screamed at me to do, which was scoop my child up and run in a straight line until there were no hallways left. On the screen, my son stirred. He drew his knees up closer. He reached one arm towards the side rail, as if he were reaching for a hand. "Please," I said to something empty, "please leave us alone." The dimness thinned, pulled back, and the blue filled the doorway again, like water refilling a mold. I lay there and shook, the muscles in my thighs jumping like I'd run a sprint I couldn't remember starting. I didn't sleep. Around 5, the birds outside began their mechanical praise. At 6, my son padded into our room and climbed into the bed like a tired seal. He pressed his cold toes to my shin and whispered, "Thank you for his standing last night." I didn't ask how he knew. He knows the story his body is in. That day, I made an appointment with a pediatrician to talk about sleep. I emailed a friend, then deleted the email. I looked up carbon monoxide poisoning. Because the internet says if you see things at night, maybe your house is actually killing you. The detector was fine. I looked up sleep paralysis and felt briefly betrayed by science for being so tidy. I looked up cameras, spirits, grayscale artifacts. I looked up the address of our house to see if anyone had died in it recently, and immediately hated myself for turning my child into a sentence on a true crime page. At nap time, I tried to get him to tell me more. "Does he have a hat?" I asked, because some story online told me that if a shadow has a hat, you are in myth territory. "No hat," he said, bored, "just long." He drew a line in the air from the top of the doorframe down to mid-calf. "Taller than Daddy," he said solemnly, which in our house means too tall. "And no face," I said carefully. "Like smooth?" He thought a long time. "Like a finger," he said at last, showing me a small, plain fingertip. "But big." He tapped his own cheek. "No holes." He smiled, then stopped smiling, as if remembering. The following night, I invited the dog to sleep outside his door. Our dog is useless when it comes to socks and barf and remembering not to chew books, but he is ancient and certain about thresholds. He lay across the doorway like a lion in a small museum. If anything tried to step through, it would have to step over 14 arthritic pounds of bravado. At 2 a.m, he growled in a way I had never heard before, deep and surprised, like he had been nudged by something that didn't smell like anything. I sat up so fast I made the bed bark. He stopped. He raised his gray muzzle and sniffed the air. He thumped his tail twice, as if to assure himself that he still existed. At 2:59, the app pinged. Motion detected. The dimness slid in like a cloud over a lake. The dog's head lifted, ears pricked. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He watched the space above him with his soft old eyes and thumped his tail once against the floor, like you might tap your foot when a person you don't like walks by and you want them to think you're calm. My son rolled over, reached out a hand just like the night before, and then tucked his fingers back under the blanket, as if remembering the rule not to reach into doorways. That was the night my husband saw it too. Not with his eyes. On the app. He had been entertaining me, I think, indulging, humoring the anxious spiral he has watched me follow since pregnancy. He opened one eye at the ping, glanced at the screen, and frowned. "Glitch," he muttered. He turned the phone sideways, watched it in full screen. The dimness brightened, thinned, darkened again, like the camera was trying to account for a shape it couldn't label. I watched his face, not the screen. I watched his expression move from half asleep to clear and focused. He didn't speak. He put his palm on my knee and squeezed once. Then he set the phone down slowly. "Okay," he said to the ceiling. His voice was clean. "Okay." We didn't call anyone. You can't call anyone and say, "There is a thing in my hall that the camera can't decide is a thing." You can't call the church you don't attend, and the police you don't want to bother, and the counselor who counseled you not to feed it. You can't call your mother because she will tell you you're tired. You can't call your friend because she will tell you her own story, and suddenly you will be comparing haunting frequencies like recipes. We did what you do when something takes up space in your house and doesn't pay rent. We tried to live around it. We kept the nightlight. We started leaving an extra bowl of water by the door because the dog was thirsty and we couldn't remember when he had last drunk. We made rules. "If you see him," I told my son, "you can tell him to go away. You can also call for us. You can also hide under your blanket." I typed out those sentences to see how dumb they looked and decided they looked like a woman trying to tell her child what to do when it rains knives. The thing in the doorway didn't like talking. It liked standing. It liked the hours between 1 and 4. It liked the nights when the wind licked at the corners of the house, and the nights when the moon was a slab in the window, and the nights when nothing was special at all. It did not follow us in daylight. It did not knock things over. It did not whisper. It watched. Once, I left my phone on the dresser and forgot about it. Hours later, I found it still recording from the app, a long blue film of sleeping. I scrubbed through, little white dot dragging across my kid's unconscious body, twice, 3 times. A gentle gradation darkened the doorway and then drained away. In one frame, for exactly 1 second, the lens hiccuped and sharpened, and 2 ovular voids appeared where eyes should be. Not holes, not light. The opposite of both. Emptiness in the shape of seeing, then blur, then blue. I deleted that clip because you can't live with that on your phone. If you have it, you have to show it to people. If you show it to people, it moves into their houses too, just enough to stand in their doorways in their heads. Better to let it dissolve back into pixels. The thing started getting closer, not into the room. It respected the plane of the threshold like a cat afraid of tape. But it pressed against the frame. One night, the blue halo of the nightlight skittered across something like collarbone. My son whispered, "Don't come in," and I found myself whispering the same words, matched, like a duet. Sleep deprivation makes time rotten. Days get thin and ragged. You eat wrong, you forget words. You stand in the shower and watch the curtain for shapes. I caught myself checking the hallway in daylight as if it might have learned a new trick. I caught myself humming to myself at the sink to cover any tiny sounds that might not be the house. I caught myself pausing before I walked past my own bedroom door in case doorways liked doorways. The counselor asked if anything had changed at home. I said no. Then I said yes. My kid had gotten a bunk bed for his birthday. Top bunk he never used. Ladder like a small ladder to nowhere. She nodded, made a note. "Transitions can start nightmares," she said. "Beds are strong symbols." I wanted to tell her that symbols don't dim nightlights, but I nodded too. We were all nodding to keep the waters still. One afternoon, my son and I were putting clean clothes away in his dresser. The house was bright and ordinary. The dog snored like a little engine. I said casually, like I was asking if he wanted crackers, "Does he come from the hallway?" He shook his head. He pointed up. "He comes from there." "The ceiling?" He meant it casually too. "From the corner," he added, pointing at the exact seam where the camera sits. "He stands on the ceiling, and then he is at the door." That night, the app pinged at 2:58. I watched the ceiling corner instead of the door. The blue deepened there, a bruise in the plaster, and thinned into the frame. There was no sound, not even the small clicks the house makes in winter. Just a thick and thin, a folding. The camera adjusted its brightness 1 notch down, then back up, polite. A week later, I moved the nightlight from the outlet to the top shelf of the bookcase, half thinking more ambient light would help, half hoping I could catch the thing off guard. The first night after the move, the shadow did not come. The second night, it did. It came slower, like it was learning the topography again, like a person groping for a familiar light switch in a hotel. On the third night, it came closer than ever. The blue softened around it as it pushed up against the frame. The line of the door sharpened, then fuzzed, like heat cameras do over mouths. My son slept with his hand under his cheek. My husband's breath beside me was deep and even. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted metal. "Go," I said, not loud. "This isn't your house." The dimness leaned. The blue thinned across the suggestion of where a head might be. For a second, the app stuttered and drew a green box around the doorway, the same box it uses for person detected. Then it thought better of itself and removed it. No person, just the negative of one. I stood up, bare feet on cold wood. The dog made a sound like a question. I walked 3 steps and stopped at the edge of the doorway, not crossing it. "You don't get to watch him sleep," I said. My voice shook. "You don't get to stand in my house like a coat rack, wearing nothing." The air between the frames tightened. I felt it in my teeth, more than my skin, pressure change, like elevators. The hairs on my arms stood up. The dimness fluttered, like someone had breathed on a candle far away. The blue brightened. Then the threshold was empty again. I thought maybe that would be it. You get one good speech at a ghost, and then the credits roll. That's how stories end. Not this one. The next morning, my son had a bruise on his shin. A small oval, faint, the sort you get from bonking a toy bin or a coffee table leg. He didn't cry when I touched it. "When?" I asked. He shrugged. "Night," he said. I wanted that to mean anything but what it meant. That day, a package came. No return address. Inside, a small wooden figure, hand-carved, smooth and dark. A person with no face. Long arms. Taller in ratio than human. No note. No order history. I showed it to my husband. He turned it over, ran a thumb along the grain, and said, lightly, "It's just folk art. We don't know anyone who sends us folk art." I threw it away. The next day, it was on the hall table again, like it had been moved there by someone who didn't know where we kept the trash. I carried it outside and put it in the big bin under a bag of old grass clippings. That night, the dog whined at the back door until I let him out. He returned and sat in the hall, staring at the ceiling, breathing fast. I checked the bin in the morning. The figure was gone. We left for a weekend. A hotel 2 towns over with a pool and thin towels and the kind of air conditioner that rumbles you to sleep, whether you like it or not. My son slept through the night and didn't raise his hand. He woke up pink and loud and asked for cereal and never said the word hallway. I cried, folding the towels into the return bin. You don't realize how much adrenaline you have in you until the part of you without it shakes. We came home on Sunday. It smelled like our house. The camera blinked green. The dog trotted in circles like he had a job. I carried suitcases to the bedroom. My son ran into his room and shouted, "Delighted! He's here!" Like a friend. The kind of friend children love, even when you don't. My legs wobbled. "Where?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He pointed at the doorway and laughed. He clapped his hands twice and looked up at the corner like he had just remembered a joke. He lay on the floor on his back and kicked his feet at the air, giggling, like when he used to play ceiling fan. I stood in the hall and felt something watch me watch my child. That night, when the app pinged, I didn't pick it up. I lay on my side and stared at our wall and counted to 1,000. My husband whispered, "Should we move?" into my hair. "You can't move from a doorway," I whispered back. "Doorways are everywhere." And anyway, this felt attached, not to boards and plaster, but to something you pack without noticing. We tried other things. We put salt across the threshold because a friend's aunt said so, and the dog licked it up. We burned sage because a neighbor insisted and almost set off the alarm. We brought a priest who looked at us kindly and put his hand on my son's head and prayed. And my son sang the ABCs to a plant while he did. We read about cleansing and intention and adjacency to madness. We read stories from other parents who described a hat man or a thin man or just there was something. And we learned a new language of fear, shadow people, sleep visitors, watchers, thresholds. One night, when I was so tired my eyes throbbed, I scrolled through old photos on my phone just to give my brain someplace to land. I found a video from last summer, my son running through the sprinklers squealing, the dog strafing in circles. In the video, there is a second where the camera flicks past the back door. In the glass, a reflection of the hallway. In the reflection, the suggestion of a tall blank oval where a head would be. It could be lens flare. It could be my own arm. It could be nothing. It is also exactly the shape I see when I close my eyes. I closed the Photos app. I put the phone screen down on the nightstand, like putting a glass over a bee. The last night before I decided I would take down the camera for good, my son woke at 3:01 and didn't move, just stared at the doorway, eyes open like someone just turned him on. The app pinged. I didn't look. I went to the doorway, stood with my shoulder against the frame, and spoke to the strip of space the way you speak to a person you do not want to know you are afraid of. "Listen to me," I said. "You're not allowed to stand here anymore. If you need to stand somewhere, you can stand in the hallway. If you need to watch something, watch me. If you need to take something, take my sleep, take my calm, take whatever you are already trying to take. Leave him alone." The air shifted. My ears popped the way they do when you drive into the mountains. My eyes watered. The space did not brighten, but something in it turned away. I felt it like you feel a person step back in a crowded elevator, even if they move soundless. The blue returned to a shallow pool. My son's shoulders softened. He closed his eyes. He slept. Since then, some nights are empty. Some nights, I feel a pressure in the doorway the way you feel weather in your knees. Some nights, the camera pings and shows me nothing. Some nights, I swear I see the edge of a shoulder as I walk past the bathroom, a polite, silent shape, keeping its promise to stay out of the room. Once, at 3:17 a.m., I woke to a feeling of being watched and turned my head to see the doorway taken up with darker dark, and I breathed in, and it breathed out. And then there was just a doorway again. I don't know if I imagined that one. I'm allowed not to know. We keep the nightlight. We keep the door open a hand's width. We keep the dog on the rug, where he snores like a little train, a dependable earthly noise. I took the camera down. I don't need the green box to tell me when something is a person. I know now that sometimes there is a watcher in the places we think are just space, and that naming it doesn't make it leave, and that telling it to watch you instead of what you love might be the only deal you get. Sometimes I wake in the gray edge of morning with the certainty that someone is standing in our hallway, tall and attentive, like a coat tree in a suit, and I hold my breath until the refrigerator clicks and the world resumes. Sometimes I forget for weeks at a time and think, we made it up. Then my son will say, matter of fact, as he brushes his teeth, he was here last night. And I will say, did he stay in the hall? And he will nod, toothpaste foam on his lip like a mustache, and spit and ask for a waffle. Sometimes he doesn't mention it, and the quiet feels like mercy. If you ever wake to a child at your bedside whispering about a tall man with no face, you will want to say all the things I said at first. It's a dream. You're safe. It's just the shadows. Go back to sleep. Say them. We need those words. Then listen for the sounds your house makes when it holds its breath. Watch the doorway out of the corner of your eye. Notice how the light dims without moving. Notice your skin prick when the air decides to lean. If you talk to it, talk like you own the room. Sound travels differently in the hour when the nightlight turns walls into water. Your voice can be a hand on a chest that does not have one. And if one night the blue thins and the dark presses up against your doorframe like a person thinking about knocking, and the child lifts a hand to say no, you can stand there with them, shoulder to emptiness, and say, not tonight. It may listen. It may stand outside instead, like a shadow cast by nothing. In a hallway, you will learn to walk past without looking. If you enjoy late-night chills like this, don't forget to subscribe. There are darker stories waiting for you. He's waiting for you. He's waiting for you. He's waiting for you. He's waiting.